At Flaxborough's annual charity raffle, the prizes are dazzling, the smiles rehearsed, and the scandal ready to bloom. When a winner vanishes and a ledger goes missing, Inspector Purbright must untangle more than ticket stubs. Before the mystery starts, let your thoughts wander. Sometimes the mind finds answers where the eyes do not. Are you listening late at night or during your morning tea? If you're drawn to tales steeped in intrigue, subscribe and join the investigation. Pour yourself something warm, draw the curtains close, and let's uncover the truth. It began quite respectably. In the parish hall, the Women's Guild Spring Fete was drawing to a close. Bunting drooped from the rafters like weary debutantes. The vicar had just, with damp fingers, plucked a winning ticket from the tombola drum and announced with trembling amusement, "Number 112, blue." There was a brief hush. Then, from behind the sponge cake display, Mrs. Edith Banbury rose in surprised triumph, clutching her handbag like a shield. She was not a woman accustomed to public attention. Her hair was the color of overboiled cauliflower, and her walk bore the delicacy of someone forever afraid of standing in wet paint. "Well, I never," she said faintly, tottering forward. "Go on, Edith," someone cheered. "Bet it's that enormous meat hamper." The prize table, such as it was, groaned beneath a mess of shrink-wrapped tins, crocheted toilet roll covers, and 3 indistinguishable chutneys. But at the end sat the true temptation, a Fortnum's-style basket, complete with gleaming ribbons and a bottle of elderberry wine poking rakishly through the wicker. Edith reached for it. The basket was heavier than it looked, and booby-trapped. With a violent crack, the base gave way, and its contents crashed to the hall floor in a dramatic spill of straw, fudge boxes, and a single, dismayingly familiar, lace brassiere. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, chaos. She would win something like that. I always said the prizes were rigged. Why bring a bra to a raffle for pity's sake? She recognized it, though. "Did you see her face?" "I heard it's the one Mrs. Collinson lost at the station hotel last October. And her husband thinks she was in Bournemouth." While the hall emptied in flurries of whispers and elbows, a few resolute souls lingered in scandalous delight. The vicar, white-knuckled on a pew, stared mournfully at the wine bottle, as though hoping it might turn to vinegar and erase the evidence. Mrs. Banbury, face rigid and voice shrill, insisted the basket had been tampered with. "I shall write to the council. This is not what I would call appropriate for an afternoon in aid of the British Heart Foundation." Mrs. Collinson, notably absent, was later reported to have taken to bed with an attack of feminine nerves. But it was Mrs. Teal, the grocer's wife, who noticed the oddity first. "That's not straw in the hamper," she murmured to no one in particular. "That's raffia, blue raffia, from the flower stall, and I tied the red bundles, I remember." Inspector Purbright entered the hall soon after. His raincoat, though dry, carried a faint scent of printer's ink and soap. He moved like a man unused to making sudden gestures. A mustache of mild suspicion adorned his upper lip. He surveyed the table, the remains of the hamper, and the conspicuously absent raffle sheet. He spoke not to anyone in particular, but his voice carried with the weight of dry amusement. Timing tells more truth than testimony. Sergeant Love, having dashed over from the station, greeted him with eager bewilderment. "Sir, looks like someone switched the prize basket. The good ones vanished. This was just fluff and old garments." "Whose garments?" asked Purbright mildly. Love flushed. "Well, that's the point of contention." Purbright crouched, reaching for a small torn square of card beneath the upturned hamper. "Raffle ticket stub," he said. "Not the winning one." "Wrong number?" "Wrong color," Purbright replied. He stood, looking not at the scandalized parishioners, but at the far table by the door. It had no chair, no food, and no decorations, just a forgotten clipboard. "The prize list," he murmured. "And the sign-in sheet." "But who'd want to sabotage a raffle, sir?" Purbright's eyes twinkled. "I suspect it wasn't the raffle that mattered, love. It was the reaction." The next moment came quietly but with surgical precision. As Mrs. Teal wandered past the table to retrieve her handbag, she paused, frowned, and lifted a napkin from a nearby cake plate. Beneath it, tucked with almost comedic subtlety, was a business envelope. She handed it to Purbright without a word. He opened it. Inside, written in violet ink on hotel stationery, was a letter, or rather, half of one, its upper portion torn away. What remained read, "Have the photographs. Your wife deserves the truth. Leave the rest with the basket. Buy the sign-in." Sergeant Love whistled. "Blackmail, sir." "Or something more sophisticated," said Purbright, eyes narrowing. "Let's see who didn't sign the sheet." He stepped toward the forgotten clipboard, flipped back a page, and stopped. The signature lines were blank. All of them. The room, now quiet and humming with post-chaos curiosity, held its breath as Purbright stared at the empty list. Then he turned, slowly, and murmured, "Who, exactly, organized the prize table?" There was a delicate tension in the town the next morning, the kind that clung to teacups and hung uneasily in the corners of well-kept shops. The Flaxborough Weekly Examiner hadn't gone to print yet, but the real press, tongues wagging in every corner of the high street, was already deep into its second edition. At Meekham and Blenkinsop, the gents' outfitters, customer trying on braces was interrupted by Mr. Blenkinsop himself, who leaned in and whispered, "They say it was a set-up. Someone planted that undergarment, deliberate-like, to be embarrassed." "Embarrass who?" asked the man, puzzled. "The winner," replied Blenkinsop grimly. "Or maybe the owner of the, Lacey article." Meanwhile, the cooperative butcher was refusing to speculate further after suggesting, not an hour earlier, that the incident was probably revenge for last year's tombola scandal. When pressed for details, he'd clammed up entirely, muttering only, "You don't forget a meringue that wins first place when it's clearly made with powdered egg." Inspector Purbright, however, had chosen to bypass the tea-leaf readers of local opinion. He had walked with deliberate calm from the police station to the back lane behind the parish hall, where the rubbish from the fete had been piled for collection. A few gulls loitered, unbothered by the smell of jam tarts, raffle confetti, and failed sponge entries. Sergeant Love followed, notepad in hand, eyes darting nervously toward the crows perched atop the wheelie bins. "I asked the hall caretaker about the prize arrangements," said Love. "The Women's Guild handled it, but he couldn't say who packed the big hamper." Purbright squinted at a torn length of red raffia stuck to the edge of a discarded cardboard box. He pulled it free, let it dangle in the breeze, then pocketed it. "Did he say when the hamper was brought in?" "Late Friday," said Love. "Someone dropped it off with a note. Top prize. Secure under cloth until draw." He didn't look under it. Purbright's brow barely moved. A trusting man. He turned to scan the yard again and, after a moment, moved toward a half-collapsed shopping bag lying near the bin marked "Food Waste Only." Inside, beneath a crumpled plastic poncho and several deflated balloons, was a label, the self-adhesive kind used for mailing parcels. He peeled it loose, smoothed it on his palm. The ink had run slightly from damp, but the words were legible. "Mrs. Pargeter," he read aloud. "64 Kettleby Crescent." Love brightened. "She's the Guild's raffle coordinator. That's her writing, I think." "Then perhaps we should call," Purbright replied mildly. "But not about the raffle. Let's begin with labels." They arrived at number 64 Kettleby Crescent to find a bungalow that looked faintly ashamed of its own tidiness. Mrs. Pargeter herself answered the door with a flowery apron and a rigid smile, the kind worn like armor. "Oh dear," she said. "I rather thought you'd come." She ushered them into the lounge, where doilies lay beneath everything that didn't move, and some things that did, like the squirming Pekingese on the antimacassar, glaring with biblical loathing. "I'll tell you at once," Mrs. Pargeter said, perching primly on the edge of a vinyl chair. The hamper was packed by me. On Thursday evening, I used all guild donations, arranged it myself, and sealed it with cellophane. "Did you open it again?" asked Purbright. "Certainly not." "Did anyone else have access to it before the fete?" Mrs. Pargeter hesitated. "I left it at the hall Friday evening, as per instructions. The vicar had a spare key, and the flower committee was decorating early Saturday morning." "Did you include any garments?" Purbright asked lightly. She bristled. "Inspector, I assure you no. I may have added a box of lavender sachets and a pair of knitted bed socks, but nothing indecent." Purbright nodded. "And did you use blue raffia in your wrapping?" "Red," she said at once. "The guild's colors." He showed her the damp label. "Oh, I stuck that to the top of the basket," she said, squinting, "in case it moved." That's the last I saw of it. They left her home with polite thanks and a short, puzzled yelp from the dog as Love's boot caught the edge of the antimacassar. Outside, the air had taken on the sticky scent of rising scones and afternoon judgment. "So," Love said, "either someone repacked the basket or swapped it altogether." "Swapped, I think," said Purbright. "A substitution requires less time than repacking and leaves fewer fingerprints." Love frowned. "But why do it at all? It's just a village raffle." Purbright said nothing for several steps. Then, "Did you notice Mrs. Pargeter never asked what exactly was found inside the basket? Or why were we asking?" Love blinked. "You're right. She didn't seem surprised. She was expecting us, and her story was rehearsed. Polished, enough truth to be defensible, but not a single question in return. So she's hiding something?" "I think," said Purbright, "she's protecting someone." They turned onto High Street just as a small commotion outside the bank caught their attention. Two colleagues were restraining a man in a pinstripe suit, one Mr. Collinson, known to Purbright as a rather self-important claims adjuster. He was red in the face and shouting, "She's left me!" Packed her case and gone, without so much as a blasted note. A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Love raised an eyebrow. "That's Mrs. Collinson, the one with the, Yes," Purbright said calmly. "The nerves." The inspector gazed across the street to the shop window of Vera's floral boutique. There, nestled between a faded Valentine's display and an unconvincing ceramic Cupid, was a single bundle of blue raffia. Purbright's expression was unreadable. "We'll visit the flower committee," he said. The bell above the door of Vera's floral boutique jingled with that particular brightness meant to suggest optimism. Inside, however, the air was tense with a mingled sense of lilies, roses, and subtext. Miss Vera Tiplady, who had run the shop for 17 years and the flower committee for 10, was up to her elbows in baby's breath and frowning into a pail as though it had insulted her chrysanthemums. She straightened when the inspector entered. "Oh," she said, "you've come about the raffle." Purbright's polite smile deepened slightly. "Is it that obvious?" "Well," Vera said, brushing green-streaked hands on her apron, "half the town's been in and out all morning pretending they want freesias. And no one's asked for freesias in April since 1996. So yes, I had a suspicion." Love, standing behind the inspector and already edging toward the shelf labeled decorative wire and presentation ribbons, looked up. "We understand the prize hamper was decorated in part with raffia," Purbright said gently. "Can you confirm if the flower committee used any for stall arrangements?" "We did," Vera replied, pulling out a drawer to produce several neatly knotted bundles. "But only red. Guild colors, as always. Blue was last year's theme. Used it for winter bouquets and such." "Why?" "Because blue raffia was found in the swapped hamper," said Love, "and the real one may have gone missing sometime Friday night or Saturday morning." Vera's fingers paused mid-knot. I see. She looked at Purbright directly, not defiantly, but with that strained poise common among Flaxborough women who've chaired more than 3 subcommittees. I can tell you who brought blue raffia back into circulation, she said. Delia Flann. Purbright tilted his head. Retired optician's wife, Vera added. Runs the trestle layout every year. She was tidying the storeroom last week and found a whole roll tucked behind the foam hollyhocks. Decided to use it up. I didn't argue. She gets peevish. Did Mrs. Flann handle the prize table at any point? Vera hesitated. She did help me carry the large basket in on Friday evening. I left it at the foot of the stairs while I fetched a trolley. Delia said she'd watch it. And when you returned? It was where I'd left it, or... She faltered. It looked like it was. Same ribbon, same cellophane. But now you've got me doubting. Purbright considered this. Did she have access to the hall Saturday morning? Absolutely. She was early. She always is. Claims punctuality is a form of patriotism. Love let out a small noise that might have been amusing but was quickly swallowed. May we speak with Mrs. Flann? Purbright asked. She'll be at home now, unless she's at Bro's, arguing about pork pies. The inspector and his sergeant left with a polite nod and one trailing vine of information. Delia Flann resided in a modest, semi-detached house with neatly symmetrical flower beds and an aggressively symmetrical doormat. She answered the door in a nylon housecoat and a look of brisk disapproval, as though someone had just served her overdone rhubarb. Police? She asked, her eyes narrowing. If this is about the sausage rolls, I already explained the pastry was short crust. Margaret simply doesn't know the difference. We're here about the Raffle hamper, Purbright said gently. Ah, she said, in a tone that implied this was somehow less forgivable than the sausage roll affair. She led them into a lounge cluttered with doilies, commemorative spoons, and the stale scent of decades-old potpourri. I did help with the prize table, she admitted. I brought in the large basket and helped arrange the others. Did you pack or repack the large hamper at any point? Certainly not. I did straighten the ribbons. Mrs. Pargeter had tied them all lopsided. Did you use blue raffia? I found blue raffia, Delia said. Tidying the storeroom, yes, and I used it for the decoration around the flower urns. But not in the prize basket. She sniffed. Number that was already tied when I arrived. I wouldn't presume to tamper. Were you alone with the basket at any point? Delia folded her arms. It's possible, but what are you implying? Purbright regarded her calmly. Merely that opportunity exists where certainty doesn't. There was a silence broken only by the soft whir of a mantel clock with a fake brass pendulum. Then she said, if anyone had a motive to cause trouble, it's Elsie Munt. Mrs. Collinson, Love asked, surprised. She used to be Elsie Munt, Delia snapped, before she married that puffed-up accountant. Purbright didn't react. Her sister used to date Edith Banbury's nephew, Delia continued, until Edith had a quiet word and spoiled the whole thing. Nasty business. Wouldn't surprise me if Elsie found a way to settle the score. It was always theatrical. Purbright made a note. As they stepped outside, Love muttered, that makes 3 possible women near the basket before the switch. Mrs. Pargeter, Vera Tipledy, and Delia Flann. And now possibly Elsie Munt. Mrs. Collinson, Purbright corrected mildly, who now appears to have left her husband. Rather suddenly. Love frowned. The letter, the one in the hamper, said, leave the rest with the basket. What if she did? Then the question, said Purbright, is what else she left. They stopped as a post van pulled away from the corner house across the street. A tall, gangly man in a green waistcoat was at the garden gate with a clipboard and a distinctly startled expression. Morning, he called to Purbright. You're looking into the fate incident, aren't you? Purbright turned. We are. Do you have information? The man grinned sheepishly. I'm Cedric Ballantyne. I photograph village events. Did a whole reel on the fete. Took shots of the setup, the stalls, and the prize table. Love's eyes widened. Before the draw? Just before and just after, Cedric said. I caught the moment the basket collapsed, too. A cracker of a shot. Mrs. Banbury, mid-shriek. Purbright's face remained neutral, but his tone sharpened. Would you mind showing us those photos? Cedric lit up. Of course. I've got the film in the darkroom. Took the liberty of printing a few already. 10 minutes later, in a converted laundry room that smelled faintly of vinegar and cat, Cedric laid out a series of glossy black and white prints. Purbright and Love leaned in. The first photograph showed the prize table in full display. The hamper, pristine, cellophane-wrapped, red-ribboned, sat dead center. The next photo showed the same table, perhaps half an hour later, and the hamper had changed. It looked almost identical, but the raffia was now blue. Purbright stared at the timestamp. 10:12 a.m. The draw had been at 11, so someone had swapped the prize after the stalls opened but before the raffle draw. In daylight, among crowds. Purbright's voice was calm but very quiet. Timing tells more truth than testimony. He tapped the corner of the photo, and in this case, the truth was caught on film. The evidence lay not in testimony, but in contrast. Two nearly identical images captured by Cedric Ballantyne's camera, separated by 38 minutes and a subtle betrayal of ribbon. Inspector Purbright took his time with the photographs, laying them out side by side on Cedric's kitchen table while a tabby cat sniffed indifferently at a pile of negatives. The difference was not dramatic, but clear enough. In the earlier image, the basket's decorative tie was unmistakably red. In the later one, blue. More than the color, there was a slight shift in the height of the wine bottle and a marginally different tilt in the cellophane wrapping. The effect was subtle, just enough to pass unnoticed by the casual fete-goer, but not by Purbright. Cedric hovered by the kettle. You think I caught the culprit, Inspector? I think, said Purbright slowly, you caught the moment a lie was installed. Sergeant Love squinted closer. We could identify everyone in the background, couldn't we? Cedric brightened. Quite possibly. I've got more shots. Some with a wider angle. Purbright nodded. If you'd be so kind as to print those, Mr. Ballantyne. We'll need faces. And precise timestamps. Cedric vanished toward the dark room with a cheerful sense of purpose, the kind usually reserved for amateur archaeologists who've been told their kitchen garden may contain Roman tiles. Purbright turned to Love. We now know when the switch occurred, between 9:34 and 10:12. The fete began at 9. Most of the setup was finished by past. Crowds were already moving about. Meaning anyone could have done it in plain sight, said Love. Anyone who looked like they belonged, Purbright replied. Which in Flaxborough covers quite a crowd. Love nodded. We'll need to match those faces to names. And see who left early, Purbright added. Guilt often travels light. They left Ballantyne's house and stepped back into the town center, which was now humming with polite unrest. Word had clearly spread. The empty flower stall, still bearing signs of raffia and confusion, had become a sort of unofficial monument. Mrs. Blenkinsop was seen giving it a wide berth, while Mr. Milner, the retired chemist, lingered nearby, telling a rotating cast of listeners that he had seen a woman in a green cardigan doing something furtive with a clipboard sometime before the draw. Back at the station, the front desk constable handed Purbright a manila envelope. From Cedric, he said. Dropped it off just after you rang. Said he worked quickly. Inside were 12 fresh prints, all wider angles of the prize table area. Purbright spread them across the long table in the station's meeting room. Love leaned over, a pencil tapping unconsciously against his notebook. There, he said, tapping the 4th print. That's Mrs. Collinson. Definitely her. Near the prize table, 948. And here, Purbright said, pointing to the next frame, she's gone, replaced by a cluster of school children. But look, said Love, that woman in the tweed coat, she's standing close to the hamper in both. Same spot. Don't move. Purbright leaned in. That's not Mrs. Flan, is it? Number, I think it's... Yes, that's Janet Hilby, treasurer of the Historical Society. Known for volunteering? Purbright asked. Known for keeping notes on who didn't volunteer, Love replied grimly. They studied the image. Mrs. Hilby's expression, even in monochrome, was one of pinched attention. She stood stiffly, one hand inside her handbag, the other loosely holding a folded program. Purbright's eyes narrowed. She's shielding the basket, he said, and no one else is nearby. Could be coincidence. But if it isn't, Purbright murmured, then she had both opportunity and cover. A crowd in front, volunteers milling around, and the prize table unmanned. Love frowned. Do we know if she had a reason to sabotage the raffle? No, Purbright said, but she may have had reason to alter the outcome. The inspector turned and retrieved a copy of the FET sign-in list, still blank, as established. But someone, somewhere, had to have recorded the winning numbers. He picked up the phone and rang the parish office. Yes, came the response from the vicar's secretary, Miss Denton, after a brief exchange. I do have the number sequence. I transcribed them during the draw. Could you read them to me? Purbright asked. She did, and he wrote them carefully. 112, blue, he repeated when she finished. That was the prize-winning ticket? Yes, for the Fortnum-style hamper. Do you know who bought it? Miss Denton hesitated. Mrs. Banbury said it was from her strip, but the vicar mentioned she seemed surprised when her number was called. Purbright thanked her and hung up. He turned to Love. We'll need to see that ticket, the actual one. Mrs. Banbury might still have it. If she does, said Purbright, we'll know whether she was simply embarrassed or was never meant to win at all. They reached Mrs. Banbury's home, a narrow townhouse with lace curtains and defensive begonias, just as the church bell was striking noon. She answered the door in a pinstripe housecoat and an expression of residual humiliation. Oh, she said with barely concealed weariness. More questions? Just one, Purbright replied. May we see your winning ticket? Her lips pursed. It's hardly a trophy, Inspector. Nonetheless, she fetched it from the sideboard, encased in a plastic sandwich bag. I meant to throw it away, she said, but Harold thought it might be evidence. Purbright examined it. A blue ticket. Number 112, but the perforation on the edge was unusually clean, as though cut, not torn. May I see the rest of the strip? He asked. I didn't keep it, she replied. I always tear them up and discard the unused ones. Habit. Purbright held the ticket to the light. Love shifted beside him. What is it, sir? This ticket was clipped with scissors, not torn at the seam. Could that mean she took extra care? Could mean, Purbright said. It didn't come from a strip at all. It could be a duplicate. Love blinked. But then, how would she know the number that would be called? She wouldn't, Purbright replied. But someone else might have. Someone who arranged the draw. The thought hung in the air. The basket wasn't the only thing manipulated. The ticket may have been planted, ensuring the prize went to a particular recipient. Or more cleverly, ensuring someone else didn't get it. Come, Purbright said at last, handing the bag back. We need to speak with the vicar. And as they left, the curtain across the street shifted, a narrow movement, almost shy. Someone had been watching. The Reverend Simner, a man whose voice always sounded slightly apologetic, even in triumph, greeted Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love from the vestry with a look of anxious benevolence. His spectacles hung low on his nose and trembled faintly with each nod of his head, as though uncertain whether to remain perched or surrender entirely. "I do hope this is only a formality," he said, ushering them into the modest parish office that smelt faintly of lavender polish and old hymnals. "Though I must admit I've never before hosted quite so controversial a raffle." "It's not the raffle, Reverend," Purbright said gently, removing his hat. "It's the result of the raffle that concerns us. Specifically how the prize and the winning number appear to have been, shall we say, adjusted." The vicar blinked. "Adjusted? Oh dear." Love stepped forward. "Sir, may we ask who had access to the raffle drum before the draw began?" "Well," said Simner, settling behind a desk dwarfed by a ledger, "the drum was kept in the sacristy the night before. I was the only one with a key to that room. On Saturday morning it was placed on the main table just before the draw, about 10 minutes prior. Mrs. Hilby and Miss Denton helped bring it out." "Was it left unattended at any point?" Purbright asked. "Briefly," the vicar admitted, "while I fetched the announcement cards. Only a moment, really." Purbright nodded. "And you personally drew the winning number?" "Yes." To avoid any suggestion of favoritism, Miss Denton recorded the numbers and passed me each prize slip. I called them out in order. "Did you notice anything odd about the winning ticket?" Simner pursed his lips. "Now that you mention it, the paper felt different. A little stiffer, but I assumed it was from a different batch." "Do you still have the booklets the tickets were torn from?" Love asked. The vicar motioned to a cardboard box beneath the table. "We collected the stubs for auditing purposes. It's all there." Purbright bent down, opened the box, and began sorting through strips of tickets still attached to their counterfoils. Each strip was printed with sequential numbers, alternating in red and blue. "Is there a record of which booklets were distributed to which sellers?" he asked. "Yes," Simner replied, reaching into the ledger and flipping carefully. "Here. Mrs. Banbury was given strips 170 to 180. That wouldn't include ticket 112. Purbright looked up. She claimed it was from her strip. Simner frowned. "Then she's mistaken. 112 was issued to Mrs. Arkwright, florist's assistant." "Vera Tipley's girl," Love said, catching on. "Precisely," said Purbright, rising. "Do we have any confirmation that she attended the fete?" The vicar hesitated. "She was at the flower stall in the morning, but I didn't see her during the draw." Purbright closed the box. "We'll need to speak with her." They found Molly Arkwright on her lunch break behind the florist, seated on an overturned crate with a sandwich in one hand and her mobile in the other. She was 19, lively and alarmingly composed for someone being approached by the police. "Oh, that ticket," she said, without being prompted. "Yeah, I had it, but I dropped my purse near the cake stand, and when I picked it up again, the strip was gone. I thought I'd just lost it." "When was this?" asked Love. "Saturday morning, just before 10. "Did you report it?" Purbright asked. She shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered. I only bought them to support the guild. I didn't expect to win anything." Purbright paused. "Did anyone help you look for the purse?" Molly frowned. "Sort of. That woman who's always at the Historical Society meetings. Hilby, is it? She said she'd seen someone pick it up and leave it on the corner of the prize table. But when I got there, the ticket strip was gone." Purbright and Love exchanged a glance. "And did Mrs. Hilby hand you your purse?" "She didn't have it herself," Molly said. "Said she'd seen someone else place it there. Never said who." "Did she stay by the table?" "For a bit. I think she was watching things. I looked nervous." Purbright offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Miss Arkwright. That's very helpful." As they left, Love muttered, "So Hilby had the ticket. Maybe planted the fake one. Or," Purbright said, "passed it to someone else who did. But yes, it's beginning to center." They walked back toward the station, but as they passed the notice board by the library, something caught Purbright's eye. A bright yellow flyer for the upcoming society gala evening had been pinned up. Beneath it, an older one had peeled at the corners, revealing faded list of committee members for last year's fete. He pulled it free. Mrs. Hilby's name wasn't on it, but one stood out in bold marker: Event Treasurer, Elsie Collinson. Purbright stared for a long moment. She was meant to run the draw last year, he murmured. Love blinked. But she stepped down, didn't she? Yes, Purbright said. After her, let's say, the marital situation became complicated. She left the guild soon after. No public explanation, but perhaps there was something buried in that. You think someone held it against her? I think, said Purbright, that this raffle wasn't meant to humiliate Mrs. Banbury. She was the misfire. The real target might have been Elsie all along. They returned to the station to find a message on Purbright's desk. Written in ink on a folded post-it were just 4 words. You're watching the wrong woman. No signature, no envelope. Purbright turned it over. On the back was a faint ring of teacup stain and the outline of a pressed daisy. Love leaned in. Another clue. Or a warning, Purbright said. And he looked once more at the photograph of the woman in the tweed coat standing near the prize table. Mrs. Hilby, possibly. Or someone who really wanted to look like her. The note, with its unsteady handwriting and pressed daisy, sat untouched on Purbright's desk for several minutes after Sergeant Love left the room. The inspector stood at the window, watching a bus reverse awkwardly near the war memorial. He did not move, nor did he appear to be thinking in the traditional sense. Instead, he observed how the driver leaned forward with exaggerated care, how the conductor gestured without confidence, and how no one on the pavement looked particularly concerned. That, to Purbright, was often the point. Concern rarely presented itself as panic. It arrived instead in the form of subtle adjustment, pauses, glances, quiet changes of direction, the kind of human detail that stood out only when you knew to look for it. He finally turned and folded the note into his inner jacket pocket. He did not destroy it. He intended to carry it with him a little while longer, like a pebble in the shoe. Annoying, but occasionally helpful. By early afternoon, the weather had turned the color of dishwater. Clouds hovered in layers, not yet wet, but increasingly impatient. Purbright and Love returned to the Flaxborough Library. Not for books, but for Mrs. Brimpton. She was the town archivist, a volunteer of no particular rank, but unlimited access to cabinets no one else ever remembered to check. She was also a rare species in Flaxborough, genuinely indifferent to gossip, perhaps because she already knew all of it. "Inspector," she said with surprise, glancing up from a binder of parish notices. "Don't usually see you twice in one quarter." "I was hoping," said Purbright, "that you still had records of last year's fete, particularly the raffle list, committee assignments, and any correspondence about resignations." Mrs. Brimpton raised an eyebrow. "You think this year's scandal is part of last year's business?" "I think," Purbright replied, "that motives rarely expire cleanly." She led them to the reading annex and withdrew a box labeled Fete Archives, 2023. Within moments, she had unearthed the program from the previous year, complete with tea stains and a rather dramatic purple ink signature that had bled through 3 pages. "There," she said, tapping a section near the middle. "Elsie Collinson, listed as event treasurer, but no resignation notice here." Purbright turned the page slowly. Could we see correspondence from the guild? Emails, letters, anything indicating a change in leadership? Mrs. Brimpton smirked faintly. "Oh, we don't go in for email. The guild handles disputes in longhand." She retrieved another folder and laid it before them. Inside was a handwritten note from last August. "To the members of the Women's Guild, it is with regret that I withdraw from committee obligations effective immediately. I trust this will be accepted without fuss. Matters have become personally difficult, and discretion would be appreciated. Yours, E. Collinson. No explanation, no complaint. A woman removing herself from a position of oversight and leaving silence in her place. Did anyone question this at the time? Purbright asked. Mrs. Brimpton shook her head. The guild doesn't discuss withdrawals. They just reassigned. Quietly. Love said, but it's possible someone resented the silence. Or the scandal, added Purbright. She stepped away just after the station hotel incident. Brimpton sighed. That was never officially confirmed. But unofficially, Love prompted. She tapped the box. Ask any woman over 65, and you'll get the same answer. They thanked her and made for the door. Just as Purbright reached the foyer, he stopped and turned. Does the library subscribe to the Flaxborough Gazette? Of course, said Mrs. Brimpton with mild offense. And we archive it too, back to 1911. Could I trouble you for the April issues of last year? 10 minutes later, he was holding the column titled Flaxborough Faces, Notes from the Fete. It was a largely harmless roundup of who wore what, who spilled trifles, and who won the gin. But halfway down the page, a single sentence caught his attention. And though Mrs. Collinson was noticeably absent from the raffle table this year, her name still made its way onto a donation envelope, anonymous but unmistakable. Purbright folded the paper slowly. She didn't disappear entirely, he said. She stepped back, but kept her finger on the scales. Love looked puzzled. But if she was pulling strings then, why sabotage the event now? Purbright didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, they returned to the station where a second envelope had arrived for him, this one hand-delivered by an anonymous passer-by, according to the desk constable. It was smaller, sealed with a faint trace of lavender wax. Inside was another note, written in the same tremulous hand. Check the numbers again. The real winner never claimed it. Below that, in lighter pencil, ask who held the ticket booklets. Purbright closed the envelope and stared at the message for a long time. He didn't speak until Love returned with tea. We've assumed the problem was the switched hamper, Purbright said quietly. But what if the true interference was with the tickets? Love sipped and frowned. What do you mean? Purbright laid out the possibilities. Mrs. Banbury presented ticket 112. Supposedly hers, but it came from a booklet issued to Molly Arkwright. We believed someone stole the ticket from Molly and planted it in the switched hamper. But what if that was only part of it? You're saying Molly's booklet was intercepted before she got it? Or someone added a duplicate 112 to another booklet. The only way to be sure is to count. So they did. For the next 2 hours, Purbright and Love examined every returned ticket strip in the vicar's box, comparing the sequential numbering, the stub perforations, and the signature patterns. Some bore tiny T-marks, others were folded with absent-minded precision, but eventually they found it. Strip number 110 to 115, blue, issued to Mrs. Cynthia Peel, a guild member who hadn't attended the fete due to a sciatica flare-up, according to the vicar. But the stub for ticket 112 was still attached. Love paled. So Banbury's ticket didn't come from Peel's booklet either. Purbright tapped the remaining stub, meaning there were 2 112s in circulation. Forged copy, said Love. Planted after the draw. Or before. Purbright corrected, to ensure that someone else would win a particular prize, or appear to win it. And the real 112? Love asked. Where is that now? Purbright's face remained unreadable. Hidden or destroyed. But the person who planted the false one knew it would cause embarrassment and misdirection. Love frowned. You think Banbury was set up as a distraction? I do, and it worked. All eyes were on her. Meanwhile, the person responsible slipped away with no scrutiny at all. He pulled out the earlier photographs again and stared at the background. There, he murmured. "That's the detail." "What?" Purbright pointed to the figure near the raffle table. A woman in a tweed coat. But in the next frame the same woman appeared again, 2 places over, now with her hair uncovered. "2 different people," he said. "Same height, same coat, but the second one carries her bag in the other hand. Our real suspect may have had help, or a decoy." Love started. "You think someone staged a double?" "I think someone went to a lot of trouble to confuse our timing." He stood, suddenly decisive. "We need to speak to Mrs. Hilby again." But before they could reach the door, the telephone on Purbright's desk rang. It was Constable Broom from the station desk. "Sir," he said, voice tight, "Mrs. Hilby's just turned up here. She says she wants to make a statement about the raffle and about Mrs. Collinson." Mrs. Janet Hilby was not the sort to arrive flustered. And yet, when she stepped into the interview room at the Flaxborough station, there was a distinct break in the usual starch of her manner. Her handbag, normally clenched with both hands, dangled from one arm like a shopping bag, and her brooch, an enamel pansy, was askew on her lapel. She took the offered seat, folded her gloved hands in her lap, and looked squarely at Inspector Purbright, who sat opposite her with a notepad he hadn't yet opened. "I've come of my own accord," she said at once. "I'm not here to be accused." "No one is accusing you, Mrs. Hilby," Purbright said gently. "But we're listening." Sergeant Love sat slightly behind and to the right, saying nothing, the faint scratching of his pencil the only sound after Purbright's reply. Mrs. Hilby inhaled deeply. "I've been on the Guild Committee for 15 years. Treasurer, chair, raffle steward, you name it. I've kept that group running through absences, grudges, food poisoning, and one unfortunate tea-urn explosion. But I've never seen such rot as I did this year." Purbright nodded, remaining still. "It began with the envelope," she continued, reaching into her handbag and retrieving a folded piece of yellow stationery. "It was pushed through my letterbox on Thursday morning. No name, no return address, just a message inside." She handed it over. Purbright unfolded it. The same handwriting. Lavender wax. Inside the message, "Don't let her win. Swap the prize. Use the blue. You'll be thanked later." Love leaned forward. "Her meaning?" "I assumed Mrs. Collinson," said Hilby, "but I wasn't sure." "You didn't report this?" Purbright asked. She flushed slightly. "I thought it was a prank at first, but then, well, people gossip about what happened last year." Purbright raised his eyebrows. "And what happened last year?" Mrs. Hilby hesitated. "Elsie Collinson, back when she was still on the committee, had a disagreement with Mrs. Banbury over the accounts. Something about receipts not matching and donations gone missing. It was all smoothed publicly, but people talked. Mrs. Collinson resigned before it could become a real mess." "Do you believe she stole from the fete?" Love asked. "No," said Hilby flatly. "I think she covered for someone else. Her husband, maybe, or Mrs. Banbury." "That's quite the assertion." "I don't know the facts," she said stiffly. "Only the timing. She quit just as questions started, and now here we are, she's gone, and the basket explodes like something out of a farce." Purbright leaned back. "Let's return to the note. You received it Thursday, yes?" "Yes." "And yet," he said slowly, "you stood near the prize table on Saturday morning, long enough, according to a photograph, to make adjustments." Hilby's expression tightened. "I didn't tamper with the basket," she said, "but I watched it closely. I suspected someone else might." "Whom?" Purbright asked. She looked down at her gloves, worrying about the edge of one finger. "Delia Flan. She arrived suspiciously early, had access, and she never liked Elsie. I thought she was dramatic." Love murmured, "That makes 2 people now pointing fingers at Mrs. Flan." Purbright said nothing for a moment. Then, "What about the duplicate ticket? You said in your call you had something to say about Mrs. Collinson." "Yes," said Hilby, visibly uncomfortable now. "I saw her at the fete. That morning, briefly. We were told she'd left town by then. She was wearing a scarf, sunglasses, and a hat. But I recognized her hands. Elsie has these narrow fingers and a silver ring she always wore. She was by the cake stall, then vanished. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't certain at the time." Purbright's tone didn't change. "And you believe she planted the fake ticket?" "I think," said Hilby, her voice quieter now, "that someone planted it on her behalf. Perhaps not even knowing they were doing it." She reached into her bag again and took out a photograph. "From last year's committee dinner," she explained, "taken by one of the husbands. Look closely at the coat Elsie's wearing." Purbright did. The tweed was distinct, a fine pattern of rose and brown check, with a flared lapel. And in the corner of the frame, standing beside her, Delia Flan, wearing what looked like an identical coat. "The same coat," Hilby said. "Bought on sale at Mowbray's. They were both so pleased with themselves, wore them all winter, you could hardly tell them apart from behind." Love exhaled. "The photos Cedric took?" "Yes," Purbright said. "Two women, two identical coats, moving in sequence." Hilby leaned forward. "That morning I thought I saw Elsie twice, once by the flower stall, once near the prize table. Now I think it was one of her, and one of Delia." A silence settled. Then Hilby added, "I didn't know what to do. It felt wrong, as though someone was trying to cause a scene without caring who got hurt." "Someone wanted Elsie's name dragged out again," Purbright said. Hilby nodded. "Or someone wanted it buried for good." Purbright stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you, Mrs. Hilby. You've been helpful." She rose, gathering herself. "I may have misjudged my role," she admitted, "but I've no interest in protecting anyone now. The Guild has become a web of secrets and silent agreements. Someone needs to cut through it." As she left the station, Love turned to Purbright. If Delia and Elsie wore the same coat, and if Delia stood in for her, couldn't that suggest they were working together? "It could," said Purbright, "or it could mean someone wanted us to think that." He retrieved the envelope from his pocket, the one with the daisy. "The question is," he murmured, "who keeps sending us these?" Love frowned. "Someone who knows too much, but not enough to act." "Or someone," said Purbright, "who's trying to frame two people at once, while they stay politely out of view." The afternoon light had turned syrupy, stretching shadows across the pavement as Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love made their way once again toward the quieter lanes of Flaxborough. Behind them, the usual gossip had resumed its humming presence. At the newsagent's, someone claimed to have seen Elsie Collinson board a northbound coach. At the bakery, a clerk insisted she'd returned with dyed hair and a suitcase full of spite. Everyone agreed something nasty had gone on. No one could quite agree what. Purbright, meanwhile, was more concerned with what hadn't been said. 3 notes, he said as they passed the post office. All unsigned, all written in the same hand, and none containing anything that couldn't be gleaned by a careful observer. Love nodded. "So, we're not dealing with the instigator. It's not just someone circling the edges." "Possibly," Purbright said, "or someone positioning themselves to appear helpful. Either way, we're due for a conversation with Mrs. Flan." Delia Flan opened her front door with a briskness that suggested she'd been watching from behind the net curtains for some time. She wore the same tartan house coat, though today it was buttoned all the way up as if to armor herself against suspicion. "I suppose you've come about the coat," she said at once. Purbright raised an eyebrow. "The coat? The one Elsie and I both bought. Yes, I know all about photography. And no, I didn't sneak about impersonating anyone. I spent the entire fete on my feet directing stall layouts and arguing about folding tables." Love consulted his notes. "According to Mrs. Hilby, you were alone with the prize table for several minutes on Friday evening." I adjusted a ribbon, Delia snapped. That's all. I never touched the basket again. Frankly, I think Hilby's just bitter that I got elected to head the guild this spring instead of her. Interesting, Purbright murmured. Because Mrs. Hilby believed you were the one behind the sabotage. And yet here I am, said Delia, cooperating with the police, not scribbling anonymous threats on lavender paper. Purbright's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. We never mentioned the paper, he said quietly. Delia stiffened. I assumed. Everyone's talking about notes. I imagined they were flowery. They were, Purbright replied. Lavender wax seal, pressed daisy, rather a specific assumption. Delia faltered. Perhaps I overheard. From whom? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was a pause as Purbright gently closed the notebook in his lap. Mrs. Flann, he said, when did you last see Mrs. Collinson? I haven't, she said quickly. Not since last year's guild meeting. Not even at the fete. Delia hesitated. I might have glimpsed someone like her, by the vicarage hedge, but I couldn't be sure. Yet you recognized the coat in the photograph immediately. It's a distinctive coat. Love's pencil tapped once against his notebook. Would you mind if we had a look at it? Delia's nostrils flared. I gave it away. To the jumble. I believe it's with the Methodist rummage stall now. Purbright didn't move. So, you say you were in charge of the stall layout, who assigned the cake stand and the prize table their positions? I did, she said. But it was done according to last year's diagram. Nothing unusual. And yet, Purbright said, the spot where the basket was placed, directly under the west-facing window, would have been the easiest location for someone to access it unseen during the draw, and where a replacement could be slid in from outside. Delia blinked. Are you saying someone handed the false basket in through the window? Or pushed the genuine one out, Purbright said. The window was unlatched. Love's eyes widened. That would explain how the original could vanish without anyone noticing. And who would have known to place the hamper in that precise spot? Purbright asked softly. Delia's voice cracked just slightly. I did what I was told. The vicar's layout plan. We checked it, Purbright said. It had the prize table on the opposite side of the hall. There was silence. Delia's face flushed pink. I simply thought it made more sense near the podium. Or nearer the window, Purbright said, rising. As they stepped outside, Love whispered, She's hiding something. Possibly guilty, Purbright said. Possibly fear, but what interests me more is that she knew about the lavender wax. She's read the notes. She may have written them. But why send us messages that lead to herself? Because, Purbright said, in the right light, guilt can reflect in any direction, especially when two suspects share a coat. Back at the station, Cedric Ballantyne had returned with a new envelope of photographs. These had enlarged, clearer prints from the fete. In one, Purbright spotted it, what he had suspected, now confirmed. The blue raffia around the decoy hamper was knotted in a different style. Not the crisp bow Mrs. Pargeter tied, but a slip knot, clumsier, pulled taut like twine. Do you recognize this? He asked Love. I've seen it before, the sergeant said, squinting. Used for parcel wrappings at the station. Mrs. Collinson worked there, didn't she? Purbright nodded. Before she married. Knotting was part of her daily routine. And Delia. Always used ribbon ties. Very precise. We checked her floral bundles. Love exhaled. So the swapped basket was tied by Elsie. Or someone who wanted us to think it was. Purbright stared at the knot. It's a misdirection, Love. The notes, the coat, the forged ticket. Each nudges suspicion toward either Elsie or Delia. But none of it explains why. Love nodded slowly. Then we need motivation. Purbright looked at the calendar on the station wall. Perhaps we need to look at last year's accounts. The real motive may not be embarrassment or revenge. It may be money. He turned to the phone and dialed Mrs. Brimpton at the library again. "Could you do me a favor?" he asked. "Check the 2023 Fate budget. Specifically, the final donation amounts, then compare them to the amount actually deposited to the Guild's charity account." A pause. "I'll hold on." The line was quiet for several moments. Then Brimpton's voice returned, lower now. "There's a discrepancy," she said. "Over £75 unaccounted for. No record of it in the bank receipt." "And who was treasurer at the time?" "Mrs. Banbury," she said. "Elsie Collinson was supposed to audit the figures, but she stepped down just before the review." Purbright's voice was nearly a whisper. "Then it wasn't about the basket." "No? It was about burying the past, and someone's been trying very hard to pin that burial on a vanished woman." He hung up and turned to Love. "It's time," he said. "We asked Mrs. Banbury what she remembers about last year's fete." The rain had begun to fall with the purposeful determination of a town bent on washing away its own gossip. Purbright and Love walked up the garden path to the Banbury house. As the clouds thickened above them, the rhododendrons bowed like eavesdroppers under the weight of water. Mrs. Banbury's curtains twitched the moment they stepped through the gate, and the door was opened before they had knocked. "I suppose I should have expected this," she said, not unkindly. She stood aside to let them in, and this time she made no effort to smile or conceal her nervousness. The front room, previously tidy to the point of sterility, now bore the marks of disturbance: an upturned envelope on the coffee table, an uncapped pen on the arm of the sofa, a plate of half-finished toast. Purbright removed his hat and remained standing. "Thank you for seeing us again, Mrs. Banbury. We've come with more precise questions." She nodded and folded her hands. "I imagine you found something?" "We've found," said Purbright gently, "that last year's fete donations were short by £75. That discrepancy was never explained. You were listed as treasurer." She didn't flinch. "Yes, I was. You also claimed, during our first visit, that the raffle ticket you presented came from your own strip, but the ticket was from a booklet issued to another person. Do you still maintain it was yours?" Mrs. Banbury hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached for the envelope on the table and opened it. Inside was the real strip. Tickets numbered 107 to 112. All red. Not blue. "I lied," she said softly. "I had ticket number 112, but the wrong color. When they called, I panicked. I knew I hadn't won. But the prize was already falling apart in front of everyone. All eyes were on me. What was I supposed to do? Say it wasn't mine and watch the spectacle get worse?" Love's voice was careful. "So the fake ticket was already in your bag?" "No," she said. "It slipped into my handbag during the commotion. I found it later that afternoon. I recognized the number but didn't question it. I was too humiliated to think clearly." Purbright said nothing, only folded his arms and let the silence encourage her. After a moment, she sighed. "I think I know who did it," she said, "but I hoped you wouldn't come to me with this." "Mrs. Collinson?" Purbright asked. "No," said Mrs. Banbury, surprising them both. "Elsie may have stepped down in disgrace, but she never had a cruel streak, and she never wanted the money." "Then who?" She looked at her lap. "Delia. It had to be." Purbright frowned. "You were friends." "We were," Mrs. Banbury said, "but things changed after the accounts review. I told Delia I couldn't cover her anymore. I'd tried. Lord knows I had, but the math wouldn't. Stretch, she used some of the donations to pay off her niece's tuition fees. Said she'd repay it quietly before anyone noticed. And then? She didn't. And when Elsie started asking questions, Delia panicked. I think that's why she pressured Elsie into resigning." "Pressured how?" "I don't know. Perhaps she suggested a scandal might resurface. Something from the hotel. Elsie was fragile by then. Her marriage had begun to collapse, and her position in the guild was already shaky. "And this year?" Purbright pressed. "I suppose Delia worried the issue would come up again. Maybe she thought if Elsie were made to look manipulative or vengeful, no one would revisit the accounts. I was her insurance. If the basket exploded on me, no one would suspect her. Just another bungled village moment." "But the notes?" Love asked. "I didn't write them," Mrs. Banbury said. "But I did receive one, slipped under my door the day before the fete." She went to a drawer and produced a small piece of the same yellow paper. It read, "Don't forget you're vulnerable too. Be quiet. Look surprised." Purbright took it carefully. "No signature. Number, but the envelope smelled of lavender." He nodded. They all did. Love said, "You didn't think to come forward." "I was ashamed," she said, "and frightened. I thought if I played it would pass. I didn't know anyone would go so far as to forge tickets." "Did you know the basket had been switched?" "I suspected it," she said. "When the hamper collapsed and that undergarment fell out, I knew it wasn't the original prize. I helped Mrs. Pargeter assemble it. There was no brassiere." There was silence. Then she added, "I still have the receipt for the actual contents. We kept it in case anything spoiled and had to be claimed." Purbright took it from her. A single printed itemized list from the co-op: biscuits, jam, a bottle of wine, and 4 toiletry items. No mention of lace. "May I keep this?" "Of course." Outside, the rain had thickened to a steady patter. As they walked back toward the station, Love exhaled. So Delia switched the basket and planted the forged ticket. She knew the original raffle winner wouldn't come forward, and if someone else did, Mrs. Banbury, say, it would be too late to trace. "She orchestrated a collapse to mask a theft," Purbright said, "but made it look like the fallout from last year's scandal. So he'd chase Elsie's ghost instead of examining the accounts." "And the notes?" Love asked. "Insurance. Red herrings. A breadcrumb trail that led nowhere and made everyone suspicious of everyone else. Particularly Elsie. The coat swap helped with that. But if Delia orchestrated everything, she's bound to slip," Love said. "She already has," Purbright replied. "She described a detail about the notes we hadn't mentioned. She moved the prize table, contrary to the official diagram, and she lied about giving the coat away." Love looked up. "She still has it. Perhaps. Or someone else does. Either way, it's time to put this to the test." He paused under the awning outside the station. "We'll hold a follow-up meeting. Ask all parties involved to attend. The guild committee, the vicar, Hilby, Pargeter, and Delia." Love nodded. "And what's the purpose of the meeting?" Purbright allowed himself a faint smile. "To clarify accounts," he said, "and see who brings a coat to cover their tracks." By the following afternoon, the weather had returned to its more customary mild drizzle, soft enough to be ignored by habit but persistent enough to soak through the resolve of the half-hearted. Inside the small parish hall, a place which had witnessed generations of overly polite conflict, chairs were arranged in a neat horseshoe. A folding table bore tea, a tin of bourbons, and the implied threat of uncomfortable civility. Inspector Purbright arrived first, accompanied by Sergeant Love, who carried the folder of photographs, documents, and handwritten notes like a man bearing both burden and bait. Mrs. Pargeter came in next, her face pinched with worry, clutching a tartan-patterned clipboard. Then came Mrs. Hilby, whose expression suggested she might accuse the curtains of impropriety if given time. Vera Tipledy followed, arms folded, eyes watchful. Behind her, slightly winded but alert, was Reverend Simner. Lastly, with the deliberate calm of someone refusing to be flustered, Delia Flann entered. She wore a tweed coat, the same rose and brown pattern as the one in the photograph. Unbuttoned, on full display. Love, seated to the side, didn't so much as glance at Purbright, but a barely perceptible stillness passed between them. "Thank you all for coming," Purbright began, his voice as steady and polite as if he were introducing a knitting demonstration. "We've called this informal meeting to clarify several matters regarding the recent Raffle incident. As you're all aware, concerns have arisen over a substituted prize, a forged ticket, and a series of anonymous notes." No one moved. No one spoke. "We've gathered ample documentation," he continued, "including photographic evidence, ticket book audits, and confirmation of discrepancies in the previous year's financial records. Our aim today is not to assign blame hastily, but to allow each of you an opportunity to address any confusion directly." He paused and turned to Mrs. Banbury, seated nearest the window. "Mrs. Banbury, would you confirm for us? The ticket you presented was not from your original strip?" She swallowed, but nodded. "That's correct. I acted out of embarrassment. It had slipped into my bag." "And you later received an unsigned warning?" "Yes." He turned next to Hilby. "Mrs. Hilby, you told us you received a similar note instructing you to observe the basket and intervene if necessary." Hilby shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, I misunderstood the intention. I thought I was helping prevent a disruption." Purbright's gaze moved to Vera Tiplady. "You oversaw the floral arrangements." "I did," she said with a flicker of irritation. "And noticed the change in raffia, yes, but I didn't see the swap happen." "And you, Mrs. Flann?" Delia looked serene. "I adjusted the basket on Friday evening, but I did not return to it on Saturday, as I've already explained." Purbright gave the faintest of nods. "Let's return to that Friday. According to the committee's layout diagram, the prize table was meant to be placed beside the podium, yet it ended up under the western window." "I changed my position," Delia said. "The lighting was better." "An impromptu decision?" "Yes." "Did you consult the vicar or Mrs. Pargeter?" "I didn't think it was necessary." Mrs. Pargeter pursed her lips but said nothing. "And the raffle box," Purbright went on, "was kept overnight in the sacristy, which only Reverend Simner had a key for." The vicar nodded. "Yes. I placed it on the main table that morning myself." "And did you leave it unattended?" "For only a moment. I went to fetch the prize slips." Purbright folded his hands. During that brief moment, the basket was already positioned under the window, a window which, by coincidence, had been unlatched. There was a small silence. Delia tilted her head. "You're suggesting someone passed the replacement basket through the window?" "I'm suggesting," Purbright said, "that it was made easier by its placement, which you arranged." She smiled faintly. "Pure convenience." Purbright took a photograph from the folder and placed it on the table. It showed the two women in matching coats, Delia and Elsie Collinson, from the previous year's committee dinner. "Your coat is rather distinctive," he said. Delia's eyes flickered to the image. "Yes, it was on sale. We both bought one." "Mrs. Hilby told us she saw someone wearing this coat near the cake stall, and then again by the raffle table. We now believe those were two different people." Delia remained still. "You think I impersonated Elsie?" "I think," Purbright said, "that someone wanted to draw attention to her, and that's more easily done when the visual cue, 'This coat,' is planted where it can be seen by multiple witnesses." Delia sat back. "An awfully clever way of framing someone." "Indeed," Purbright said. "And the forged ticket, clipped, not torn, matches no official booklet distributed. It was printed on similar stock but a different shade, only noticeable under bright light. Again, subtle, but deliberately." Hilby leaned forward. "You mean to say the ticket was made up?" "Yes, but with one key flaw," Purbright replied. "It was folded along the short edge, not the standard roll style, the kind of fold used by the stationers when packaging loose samples." He turned to Delia. "You worked at Broadley's Stationery for 10 years before your niece's tuition required full-time care." Delia's face remained composed, but her hands tightened slightly on her lap. We traced the knot on the basket's blue raffia to one you used previously at a floral display last October. Exact same method. Not a bow, but a pull knot, finished with a tucked end. Only you and one other person in the guild used that technique, and the other was away that weekend. Delia glanced toward the door, but no one moved. Purbright added, more softly now, "We also know £75 went missing last year, and Mrs. Banbury has provided us with the receipt and ledger gap that traces back to your signature." There was silence again, thicker this time. Delia inhaled through her nose. "I never meant it to become so theatrical. It was only meant to divert." "You used the scandal to keep eyes elsewhere," Purbright said, "and pinned it on someone whose absence made her a perfect scapegoat." Delia nodded once. Elsie had already vanished. I only nudged the town to remember her poorly. Love, still seated, spoke gently. "Why not just return the money?" "I tried," she said quietly, "but my niece needed a second term's deposit. And then, well, it became a house of cards." Purbright stood and others slowly followed. No one spoke. Even Hilby looked subdued, though not unpleasant. "We'll make a formal statement," Purbright said, "and we'll request the guild suspend all account handling until the investigation concludes." Delia nodded again and began removing her coat. Purbright didn't stop her. Outside the rain had stopped, but the town remained grey and still. A village that had not noticed a theft, but had very much noticed the theatre around it. It was not the arrest that made the news, it was that there hadn't been one. Delia Flann, former guild chair and general authority on table layouts, had left the parish hall with a borrowed umbrella, her tweed coat neatly folded over her arm, and a dignity that somehow remained intact despite the slow collapse of the narrative she had built. She didn't resist. She didn't deny. She didn't explain more than was necessary. And by the time Purbright and Love had completed the formal statement at the station, she had signed each page with the same tidy, unshaken hand she had once used to write checks for buns and bunting. "I won't contest any of it," she'd said simply. "I made choices. Some are foolish, some desperate, but I didn't want anyone to get hurt." And then, after a pause, she'd added, "Though I admit I thought Mrs. Banbury might have handled the spectacle with a bit more flair." With the investigation now complete, the guild committee temporarily suspended, and the vicar gently suggesting a period of quiet, prayer and budget recalibration, Flaxborough began, as it always did, to smooth its rumpled skirts and carry on. The gossip had already turned its attention to whether Mr. Collinson might reappear now that his wife's name had been unblackened, or whether he had permanently decamped to his sisters in Wellingborough, as rumour insisted. Mrs. Hilby, whose vindication had been earned with less glee than expected, began leading a new initiative for financial transparency and charitable raffles, much to the dread of every church hall organiser from here to Swineford. Vera Tiplady returned to her floral duties with less commentary, though she did begin tying all bouquets with white raffia only. No red, no blue, no ambiguities. Mrs. Banbury, for her part, stayed mostly indoors, not out of shame but to regain some measure of privacy. She declined the vicar's invitation to speak at the next guild meeting. She did, however, send a small box of lavender soaps to Elsie Collinson with a note that simply read, "I think I understand now." As for Elsie, if indeed it had been her in the coat near the cake stall, nothing further was seen of her. The station master confirmed that someone matching her description had indeed boarded a coach to Grantham the morning after the fete, carrying a plain suitcase and a folder under one arm. Whether that folder contained old bank statements or simply sketches of revenge, no one knew. It was 2 days later, on a Thursday morning brimming with weak sun, that Inspector Purbright returned to the parish hall. Not for business, but to retrieve a notebook accidentally left during the committee meeting. Inside, he found the room empty except for Cedric Ballantyne, who was adjusting the settings on a borrowed slide projector. "Inspector," he said cheerfully, "thought I'd prepare a little exhibit. Flaxborough in bloom, the year we nearly lost the hamper. Title still in progress." "Very tasteful," Purbright said, glancing at the makeshift screen. Cedric lowered his voice. "It's all gone quiet again, hasn't it? Like someone shut the door on a loud room." Purbright considered that. "Or perhaps someone reopened a window," he said. "Let the air shift back." He collected his notebook, nodded to Cedric, and stepped outside. Love was waiting beside the car, arms crossed, squinting toward the bakery. "Two ladies just had a shouting match over the last treacle tart," he said. "Restoring balance, I suppose." Purbright unlocked the passenger door. "What of Delia?" "Bailed until the hearing. Likely a fine. Possibly community service. Guild's been advised to keep her from handling money just in case." Purbright nodded. A quiet end. They drove a while without speaking. The road curved gently past allotments, a playground, and finally the Flaxborough Library, where Mrs. Brimpton was tidying the public notice board, her grey bun determinedly vertical. Love, finally, said, "Funny, isn't it? That something so petty could lead to something so twisted." "Not funny," Purbright said. "Predictable." Love frowned. "You think it'll happen again?" "Some version of it. Different faces. New resentments, but always the same shape. Small things. Pride. Fear. The desire to rearrange appearances." He slowed as they passed the Methodist church, where a group of volunteers was unpacking a delivery for the upcoming rummage sale. One, a teenager, held a folded coat, rose and brown tweed. Purbright slowed to a stop. He opened the door and left. "Excuse me," he called. "Where did that come from?" The girl blinked. "Donation bin, sir. Yesterday morning. No name. Just a note in the pocket." He held out his hand. She passed the paper over. It was yellow. Folded once. No wax seal this time. Just a single sentence in the now familiar handwriting. The costume served its purpose. "I'm not dressing for them anymore." Purbright read it twice. Then he smiled faintly and handed it back. "No need to keep that," he said. Love looked over. Was it from her? Purbright didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked up at the sky where the clouds were beginning to break apart and said, "Let's get back. There's always next week's planning committee. I hear they're choosing new bunting colors." Love groaned. "That'll be bloodier than this." "Likely," said Purbright, "but at least they won't put lace in the hamper this time." And with that, they drove on.